Hello everyone, this is Dr. Elizabeth Schilling. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about Angela of Foligno and basically just focusing on her first 20 steps of the Blessed Angela in the way of penance and spiritual perfection. So I'm just getting into studying her, so I'm sure that as I go along, I will develop my thoughts and knowledge, and I'll share that with all of you. So Angela was a 13th century medieval Italian Franciscan mystics. She was canonized as a saint by the Catholic Church in 2013 or 2014, around there. And basically she was born in 1248. Her birth date isn't exactly super certain, but she was born into a wealthy family in Umbria, and she was probably married at an early age and had several children. And it was not until the age of 40 that she had a vision of Francis of Assisi and sort of started her initiation into the Passion of Christ. And let's see, I'm just checking the recording. All right, so just as a quick summary, kind of before we get into this, this is a really interesting piece of spirituality and religion because it basically summarizes in a very beautiful way someone's transformation from being sort of ruled by fear and shame into sort of a higher consciousness contextualized by love and all of these sort of ecstatic kind of spiritual experiences that are brought on through meditation, solitary meditation. And as the title says, she has 20 steps, and I don't think that the last step was really described. She's dictating this to a friar, I think, and so it says, the step presented here as the 20th is the first which I, the unworthy friar writing it, received and heard from the mouth of the faithful servant of Christ who related it to me. I have decided not to finish or continue it at this point, except to say that this step is simply wonderful, very long, and filled with great divine revelations and the delights of divine intimacy. And it goes on a little longer. So basically, when Angela sort of started on this path, she says the first step is the awareness of one's sinfulness, in which the soul greatly fears being damned to hell. In it, the soul weeps bitterly. And the second step is the confession of sins. So a lot of the beginning steps, and you'll see that she kind of goes through a roller coaster of emotions, which I think we all do when we're kind of into, embarking on a spiritual sort of journey or path. And I think it's so interesting that she doesn't really come to this until she's 40 years old. Because I was recently listening to a Celtic priest, Father Sean O'Loughlin. He has a great YouTube channel called Spirits in Spacesuits. I saw an interview of him on Gaia.com, and he said, if I can remember this correctly, that when Druids were teaching their initiates, there was some information that they didn't give until the initiate turned 40, because the information was so intense, and if you weren't ready for it, it could harm you and harm others. And so I wonder how many people sort of went through or are going through a spiritual awakening at sort of a later age, and that journey that they took to get there. So I think it's interesting that she focuses so much on shame. She says that she had often received communion in a state of sin because she had been too ashamed to make a full confession of her sins. And she keeps describing steps as the different steps as she's trying to get closer to God and pray and do sort of figure out how to connect to God and to feel God's love. She says that the soul still feels only shame and bitterness. It does not feel love, only grief. And I feel like shame is a very visceral sort of situation. Let me see if I can go over to my notes. They're over on this other computer, because I'm actually writing something for a website called feminismandreligion.com, and if you're interested in a little bit of more of a feminist reading of this, then it'll be out, I think, on the 26th of November. So shame is a visceral state, emotional state, one that destroys self-worth. According to the Oxford English Dictionary, shame is the painful emotion arising from the consciousness of something dishonoring, ridiculous, or indecorous in one's own conduct or circumstances. So etymological connections can be made to the Germanic word hame, I think, which indicates a covering, such as one that a serpent discards. So shame is usually a feeling that something about ourselves is wrong, that our spirit or soul is a stain. And where we sort of get this shame from, I think, can vary. We don't know a lot about Angela of Foligno's life and her biography. But a lot of times it comes from sort of toxic indoctrination, maybe humiliation or emotional psychological manipulation when you're growing up. And it's interesting to think about what Angela's sort of childhood family relationships are like. We'll see that later she talks about wanting to sort of be released from her relational ties to the extent that she wants her mother and her husband and her sons to die. And they do. And she says in this, when she's discussing the 9th step, she says, because it happens a few years after she starts on this path, she said that she had prayed to God for their death and found a great consolation when it happened. So she said that it came to pass, God so willing, that at that time my mother, who had been a great obstacle to me, died. And it's so compelling to me and interesting to me that Angela felt that the only way she could be released from these sort of obligatory relationships was death, and so that, says to me sort of several things, that maybe it wasn't just that, she found a new love, or she was distracted and she just regretted her decisions. Why was her mother an obstacle as well? So she talks about when she's on this path to chosen poverty and she's trying to give up all of her possessions to the poor and become poor. She says how there's various influences in her life that are trying to convince her not to do that or not to give away so much. And you can see that she kind of goes back and forth between feeling passion and desire and, starting to feel a little bit of peace and love and self-doubt. And almost to the extent that she's gaslighting herself and letting herself be gaslighted. I think that it just depends how much self-worth someone has and how much confidence one has. And we also have to have a clear view in and confidence of our reality, which doesn't necessarily happen unless we were shown that our voices and our desires when we were growing up really mattered and they were valid and they were accepted. We didn't have to walk on eggshells, or we didn't have to agree with our parents or the people that are around us. We were free to express and explore and experiment. When that happens, that's a really healthy dynamic where you are allowed to grow and evolve and even rebel and separate against your parents. You can develop this strong identity and strong sense of self-worth, and therefore create healthy boundaries for yourself and expect others to respect them. But when you feel when you're growing up that you have to hide your truth, that you're confused about reality because people are convincing you that you're wrong, or, are too defensive to admit that they were wrong or they made a mistake, and it confuses you as a child because you assume that everyone's going to be honest. Then you sort of start to be too susceptible to what other people are saying, and you feel sort of stuck and suffocated in relationships because you don't know how to create those boundaries, and so you want to get out of them. And if Angela felt that her mother was an obstacle and she was praying for all of her closest relationships to disappear because the people, were dead, it says to me that there was no other way. She couldn't reason her way out of these relationships and these ties. And it could be, was the historical times that she was living in as well. But I think even people today, when you do have difficulty with honesty and expressing yourself and valuing your own reality and your own experience, and you've been socialized, as many women have been, and this is what I get into in my feminist and religion post, to sort of care about the feelings of others more than you care about yourself, so avoiding confrontation and not wanting to hurt the other person's feelings, and sacrificing your own comfort for other people's comfort. I think we see this even with celebrities who, and I'm just mentioning celebrities because we hear about them in the media, when they encounter sort of the crossing or the violation of their boundaries, especially their bodily boundaries. Many have said that they didn't say anything at the time because they were too afraid of making a spectacle. But, that we are within our right to make a spectacle if something inappropriate is happening. But she obviously felt there was no other way unless they died that she could be free from those relationships. Now, this could be that, as a married woman and as a mother and as a daughter, and a wealthy woman in society, that it was just impossible for her to dedicate, to find the space and to find the time to to follow her spiritual path and practice her spiritual path. But it also could be that there were some, maybe some of those relationships were toxic and difficult. I don't know. I'm speculating. But it seems really like a really intense desire. So she says that, and one more thing, I think it's really important when she says the soul feels only shame, it does not feel love. I think we need to learn that shame does not belong to us. Shame is sort of put onto us, but it belongs to other people who have made us, or society or institutions that have not honored our dignity and honored our agency. And so so we adopted those feelings that destroyed our self-worth. And in trying to turn to love and seek after love, shame will be dissolved, and self-worth and confidence will ignite. I recently heard someone say that in order to be on the path of higher consciousness, you need to learn how to master both fear and love. And we're not necessarily mastering fear if we are disturbed and preoccupied and ruminating over these sort of low frequency emotions and energies. If we are afflicted with intrusive thoughts, as you can see with many of the female mystics, the medieval mystics, and the early modern mystics, where they talk about these intense temptations that they'd rather be in the midst of hell and die than have these temptations, attack them. This is in the category of intrusive thoughts. And what we think about, what we give energy to, grows. And magical thinking is another consequence of a traumatic childhood. And a lot of times that magical thinking is directed toward, until we master it, it's directed toward the manifestation of things that we don't want to happen. We're always vigilant and looking out for danger because when we grow up, we were not given that sense of safety. So we were always maybe watching out for an unpredictable parent, trying to conform and craft ourselves and their vision so that we wouldn't get rejected or abandoned. Sometimes in some families, the only way to be close is to agree. And there has to be a strong sense of empathy in families in order to be grounded in a sense of reality. So she says the fourth step is growing awareness of divine mercy. So we can see the path that she's going toward. And she talks a lot about weeping in her steps as well. And I know that, so I will share that one of the reasons that I was on my month-long hiatus, which I did not plan, was that my body just sort of crashed and burned in terms of health. I stopped sleeping and I didn't know why. And I sort of figured out that there were particular stressors in my life that I really needed to remove if I was just going to survive and live. And I also knew that I was dealing with some mental issues that were affecting my health physically. And so I had to take a break from social media because I think I needed to control what I was consuming. And so I started watching more positive, sort of uplifting, kind of affirmative things. So I, canceled my subscription to Netflix, and I subscribed to Gaia.com, which is kind of a Netflix for I don't know, spiritual junkies. But I found just some really interesting series that I watched, and that kind of taught me that, our positivity and our emotional sort of frequency or levels really affect our health. We can inhibit our health in so many ways, and stress can have such negative effects. And so how do we get into a place of gratitude, and how do we sort of get in the habit of different emotions? And this is really what I see Angela of Foligno trying to do. She says it does not feel like love, only grief. And she says the soul, and this is in the fourth step, the soul begins to be enlightened, and then it weeps and grieves even more than before, and undertakes even sharper penance. She talks about in here how frustrating it is, about how much time it takes to kind of whip the soul into shape. And various therapists and healers will say that if you have lived and existed in certain emotions for so long, you can't really think your way out of it. And that's the frustrating thing that you have to learn. You have to sort of respond to these emotions that have become routine and habitual with emotions that you want to replace, that are strong, as strong or stronger, to neutralize those emotions and transform them into, something that's helpful and healthy. And weeping really indicates the releasing of repressed emotions. And that's what she's doing, though. She's trying to visualize and think upon and devote herself to the vision of Christ, and that sort of, that initiates, or that stirs gratitude for her. And but it doesn't, the revelatory thing and the liberating thing about this text is that it doesn't lead her into more, at least as I see it, more and more of self-despising, which I think that some literature in Christianity can. We are always the scum under God's shoe. But what her path is, where her path is taking her, is revelation of God's love and her own divine spark. She says that the fifth step is the knowledge of self. Oh, and also back when, on one of the first things that I said, that she took communion in a state of sin because she was too ashamed. Developing self-worth and being on a spiritual path means not being ashamed, not regretting the past or being ashamed of who we are or our desires, but it is embracing them and nurturing them, like being nurturing or compassionate toward them, even if it's something we don't want to give a lot of energy to, but it's learning how to forgive ourselves, is I think what I'm trying to say. So the fifth step is the knowledge of the self. She says, partially enlightened, the soul sees nothing but defects in itself and condemns itself before God as most certainly worthy of hell. This is a source of much bitter weeping. There's something else about crying I noticed, is that when I sort of cry or weep because I'm grateful or I'm in love with something, with sort of a revelation or an understanding, or an image, when it's kind of a pure kind of, I'm releasing repressed emotion, and I'm sort of upgrading in a sense to a higher experience, my tears feel so cleansing. But when I am weeping bitterly, as Angela is saying right here, just noticing her defects, being partially enlightened. So she's sort of growing and moving in this particular in a particular direction. But she says bitter weeping. I know when my tears are filled with sort of bitterness and self-pity and, oh, the world is so hard, and why am I going through, whatever I'm going through. My tears they sting. I have to rush to, the sink and try to splash water on my face because they burn my eyes. So it's so interesting, the chemical makeup of what your body produces when you are in certain emotional states and fields. So here she talks about time at the 5th step. She says, you need to be aware also that each of these steps takes time. It is indeed, and I love when she says this, I love this, it is indeed very pitiful and truly heartbreaking that the soul is so sluggish and moves so painfully and ponderously toward God. It takes such tiny steps at a time. As for myself, I lingered and wept at each step. My only consolation was being able to weep. And I think that when you start out on a spiritual awakening, well, as I have been starting out, I have had a lot of ecstatic moments, and I've had a lot of tears, fall when I've been meditating, just because I've been feeling these emotions that I haven't felt for a long time, such as love and gratitude, and joy and bliss and excitement and hope. And it is kind of reassuring because you can see that you are being affected and that you're feeling something. So she kind of goes on to the 6th step, and one of the things she says is that she started feeling as if she had some backing, if she had some spirits on her side. She said, I asked all the creatures whom I felt I had offended not to accuse me, and then I was given to pray with a great fire of love. She invokes all the saints to intercede for her and pray to that love to make what was dead in me, she says, come to life. And I think this is so interesting because somewhere early along my path as well, I felt that, and I hesitate to say this because of what maybe the reaction will be, but it is what it is. I had this sense, or I started to visualize, or I started to just feel that there was different, a body of, or a group of angels kind of around me, supporting me and nurturing me. And people, I think, talk about in various denominations that, they have a guardian angel. And this wasn't really ever something that I thought of or necessarily, took stock in. But, whether it's appropriate to call them angels or not, there's some sort of encouragement to thinking that the world is not completely against you, but that there are energies that want to support yours and align with yours on your path. And I think it's interesting right here that on her 6th step, she says the 6th step consists of a certain illumination. So it's almost like she's trying to apply her personal journey generally. But maybe, maybe it does. Maybe that's what it is. So she said, as a result, it did seem to me that all creatures had mercy on me and all the saints. And I think that's such a lovely transition here from thinking that she's only worthy of hell, that all she has to focus on is how she has, her sins and how she's unworthy. And now she's becoming worthy. Now she's becoming loved. Now she's becoming supported. And these ideas, I think we can critique them all that we want or have doubt, but having faith and having hope in something and believing whatever you believe that generates gratitude and hope, that cleanses your body and makes it lighter. And so, for some people it is spirituality or sacred philosophy, looking through philosophy to see what can help you personally. To some people it's creating art or music. To some people it's healing relationships in their families. I was reading the Gnostic, some of the Gnostic texts the other day, the Gospel of Thomas, and there's something that Yeshua says, that if you can come to peace with members in your household, you will be able to move mountains. And so I thought that was so lovely. So, being more present in your family and loving them and finding love from them can be a way that you find faith and hope and love and gratitude, and can exist in those sort of high frequency emotions. And it just makes your life better, and it gives you, if you need self-worth and need confidence, it gives you that as well. So she goes on the 7th, the 8th. There's a really interesting sort of, I think, fall from grace in the 8th step. And she's on such a great track, but then it shows you that, a spiritual path isn't, maybe overall, it's like increasing. I'm trying to think of the word to not contradict myself. It is increasing and you're following a certain path, but it doesn't mean that you won't have new things to deal with, or that your old habits won't come back, and it's how you respond to them. And here, I'm not sure she responds well, because she says that this perception of the meaning of the cross of Christ set me so afire that standing near the cross, I stripped myself of all my clothing and offered my whole self to him. And then immediately after, she says, I promised him then to maintain perpetual chastity and not offend him again with any of my bodily members, accusing each of these one by one. So it's so interesting that, and I think this really speaks to her particular situation as a woman, and sort of the shame that in some cultures, in some historical time periods, I would say in the US today still, women's bodies are there to either be, I guess, tempting and sensual, or there to be covered up. But there's no sort of, let me be free and bare for myself. And that's what she's doing here. But then she's instantly gaslighting herself, to kind of like a slap on the hand, like, no, my body is shameful. And the footnote here says that St. Francis Assisi he stripped down, and he was in public, and he went to the town center as a sort of like a sign or commitment to his sort of, I guess, a sign for his commitment to poverty. But here she, she chastises herself. And so I think that's really interesting on her past. She doesn't reflect on it later, that she just records that that's how it happens. And she mentions a more spiritual stripping in the 9th step. She says, I would need to strip myself in order to be lighter and to go naked to it. So that's why I really feel her stripping in the 8th step was material and physical, and brought up this internalized shame about the female body. So she goes through the 9th step talking about, what she needs to do in the world that can be ethical, such as forgiving all those who have offended me, giving away all of her worldly goods, taking away all her attachments to men and to women, of her friends and relatives. And even letting go of her very self. So this is when she gets into her family relations. And she says in the ninth step, the ninth step is kind of like, it's kind of long. It's like 2 paragraphs, comparatively to the others. She said this was still a very shameful and burdensome, time for her. She says, at this point, I was still not feeling any love. So at this point, I was not feeling any love. So, I think that sometimes we used to say, like, I don't know, like Wednesday night worship services, sometimes you have to come down from the mountain, and what you do there and how you feel and how you can cope and how you navigate that is just as important as your experience up on the mountain. Not to get too I don't know, Protestant. But so I think that's really interesting. It's just lovely how honest she is. And then she goes into saying, it was a favor from God that everyone died. So, you do need, not that, it's almost funny because she doesn't even condemn herself. She's just really exuberant. Of course, we don't know anything about those relationships, but you do need time and space when you are on sort of a spiritual journey or awakening or a healing of the mind and the body. And sometimes people don't understand that you need that time and you need that space. And she obviously wasn't able to have a conversation with them. So, okay, so I think I'm going to stop there. Before I go to the 10th step, and we'll just make that a part 2. But I'm just fascinated by all of this. So I hope that you've enjoyed my reading and commentary so far. I'm really glad to be back. I'm going to continue to talk about Heidegger and, all of the the canonical philosophers, but I also think that I'm going to, dip back into my expertise, which is women in religion. And so the medieval mystics kind of fit perfectly in that. So I hope that you enjoy, but there will still be, the kinds of videos or lectures that I used to make, and I hope to be back on camera as well soon. So thank you all. Let me know your comments. Let me know your questions. I'm on this, learning journey always as a student. So, if you have studied Angela, and you have any corrections for me, I would love to be in conversation and learn from you. So until next time.